Can you all see, my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm Lauren Smith, as Ian just kindly introduced me. I'm working with Center City District, Business Improvement District for downtown Philadelphia. And I just wanted to share how we use our technology, pedestrian technology specifically, to assess recovery, but also to kind of assess our programs and a lot of the other things that we're working on at Center City District. So just a little bit about Center City District. This is our boundary, and it really just focuses on the downtown area. We tried to really eliminate some of the more residential areas of downtown. We are a business improvement district that has really started with the priority of clean and safe streets. So the organization was founded on that mission. And for that reason, we manage over 100 street cleaners and customer service representatives. And every day they are cleaning every street of the boundary that you just saw. They're also doing graffiti removal, power washing, and they have also been our essential workers. They did not stop working throughout the pandemic, along with the customer service representatives who are there for people who are lost or just really a welcoming face. And they also do homeless outreach as well in partnership with Project Home. And they are truly some of the most friendly people that you will meet, especially downtown. So if you're ever in Philadelphia and see the CSRs and the teal, always just spend a moment to just say hi, because they're very, very friendly. And we also manage 3 parks. So this is a picture of Dillworth Park, which is right in front of City Hall. We do a lot of activities there. Today, even, we have a movie screening of The Lion King, and have been doing that programming. But we also have had several different summer programming, including the roller rink that we installed, which is also a ice skating rink in this winter. It comes down and then gets put back up, but there are so many different programs that happen in Dilworth because it's a really versatile space. We also did a little bit of arts in the park, where the orchestra and opera and even Philadelphia, a dance company, have performed in that space. And we also manage another park, Sister City Park, which is a really kid-friendly. Just installed a discovery garden for kids to touch and feel and kind of really engage with their senses, which was actually just completed right as the pandemic hit. And we really have transformed just from being clean and safe to also promoting the vitality of downtown Philadelphia. So it's really been a huge mission to incorporate actual activities, but also data to business leaders and everyday people who live in Philadelphia and those who aren't even in Philadelphia or maybe even looking into the market. So we spent a lot of time gathering data for a variety of reports, whether that be a housing report or transportation report. We're actually working on a bike survey. We just think we're a little data happy in some ways because we like to kind of collect everything that we could possibly put our hands on. So with that, we've been working on a monthly economic recovery report, which started actually September of 2020, and we've been issuing that every month since. And we include employment data, a little bit of tax data. We include some of our restaurant data. We include housing market data. So it's just kind of one-stop shop for all things Center City. We also have a larger report, which is our state of Center City, but this monthly report really looks at it on a day-to-day or really month-to-month basis to see how we can track recovery through all of those different topics. And as I mentioned, we kind of include information on our restaurants and retail. So we do a survey each year that focuses outside of that boundary that we actually saw earlier. So it actually goes a little farther in the different zip codes that are in Center City, and we actually survey each storefront, just not actually going in, but just looking and seeing, is this a restaurant, is this a retail space, is this a service provider? And new, because of the restrictions of the pandemic, we've been really taking count of if they're open for outdoor dining, or if they're closed, or if they're temporarily closed, available for pickup only, just so we have a good idea of what's happening. And so we increase that survey to some survey, whether it be tracking outdoor seating or vacancies every month in some way. So we, like I said, really like to get a lot of data on what's happening, and really tracking most of these things on a monthly basis. But we are here to talk about pedestrian counts and pedestrian technology. And so this is a system that we use almost every day, at least weekly. I'm looking at pedestrian counts, and we have two providers, or really two sources of pedestrian data, one being SpringBoard, which I'll start with, and that's just a motion-based kind of sensor, and then Placer, which is a cell phone-based data source. So those are two just charts that we include in our monthly report, and I'll kind of get back to them a little later. So these are the locations of our SpringBoard counters, and there's 11 of them scattered throughout really the core of Center City. And we kind of focus them on our office sector, which is really over here. Those are just mainly office buildings. And then we also have our retail below that on Chestnut and Walnut Street. And then we have our east of Broad, which is a mix of kind of office and hospitals. Jefferson has a really large footprint in our Jefferson University, and Jefferson University Hospital has a really large footprint in our downtown. And this is just as of July 2021. We produce a monthly pedestrian count report. I can share the link also to all of these things when I finish, but we track this monthly and have been tracking this for the last 5 years. We recently switched over to SpringBoard as our provider in January of 2020, actually. So it's something that we really wanted to remain consistent with throughout the years, and something that we place a lot of value in because it tells us a lot of information. So one of the things that SpringBoard is able to do, really what they give us on our dashboard is just counts of each person by hour, so by day. So they're count running for 24 hours nonstop, and they are not, like I said, counting faces or anything. It's not a camera, it's just a sensor that has a sort of boundary. If you walk past it, then they'll count you. And they have their way of, in their systems, of determining if it's a person versus a dog versus any other moving object that might be on the street, or the sidewalk rather. And I do think they have the capability, though we don't necessarily use it in this way, they do have the capability to expand out to the street and count cars and bikes in some way as well. But we look at this on an hourly and daily basis. And this is really our trends for July, and it hasn't changed much besides the actual value, but the trend has remained kind of the same. On the weekday, you see peaks at 8 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 5 o'clock. It makes perfect sense because that's when people are going to and from work. But then the weekend looks quite different. You see more of the high point being at 5 and 4 o'clock, and even our like 13th and Sampson Street is really peaking around 7 o'clock. And that is one of the largest streeteries that we have in Philadelphia. So it makes perfect sense. And as you can also see, it doesn't tail off like the others do. It's really sustained activity throughout the evening. We also just track on a general level. We are really trending around 70% of 2019 volumes, which is how we measure recovery in our terms of pedestrian counts. As you can see, it really hit the low point in April of 2020 and has been gradually going up and steadily kind of increasing. And of course, as winter months kind of happen, you see the decrease, and it's very seasonal, but all of that you can really see directly in the data. And just to show again where our boundaries are, it's this teal box is CCD's counter. So it is counting a very small area of the city, or really of downtown. Again, those are intentionally placed of kind of the higher volume areas that we're really focused and giving our attention to. But we also use Placer AI to track kind of the larger area. And what's cool is that we can kind of go through a variety of different boundaries. We have a few logged in our system to use and analyze, but this is really the map of what it looks like. Turn this off. Sorry. So we are showing 136,000 daily pedestrians in the teal area, and then Placer showing 285,000 daily pedestrians, and it kind of shows, you know, we're not necessarily counting the same thing, and that we really want to make that differentiation between the two, because again, it's not an apples to apples comparison, but it is something that works kind of cohesively together. So to explain Placer a little bit, Placer uses anonymized cell phone data to locate where the phone sleeps and where the phone works. And based on that, it can determine if a visitor is, and a visitor meaning they do not live or work in the area, or they live or they work in the area. So we like to really use this information, because when we heard that, we were like, oh, that's fascinating information to know what the residents are trending, how the non-resident workers are trending, and visitors. And as you can see here, the residents in downtown kind of Philadelphia have really remained around the same point, which makes a lot of sense. Of course, there's probably some seasonality going on there too with vacations and holidays, but for the most part, it's a solid trend line. But then we also see, as expected, the visitors and non-resident workers really plummet in April of 2020. And again, following the same trend as our pedestrian counts, the SpringBoard pedestrian counts, but just giving us a little bit more depth to that information. And it's really interesting because we really are starting to focus on the green line, the non-resident workers, because we know that people aren't really back in the office yet. They're slowly kind of getting in, and that's something that we're really focused on, to see what that green non-resident worker line does in the next couple of months. And all this data, we're actually in the process of updating it through August, and will be in our next economic recovery report. But there's a few ways that we use this data, and I wanted to share one way being retail. We really focus on retail a lot, and just wanting to engage the retail community, but also wanting to, like I said, keep that vibrancy there, and also provide them with information that they might need to make decisions. So the 1700 block of Walnut is one that we have really been spending a lot of time with, just because of some of the turnover that's happened, but also it is a really highly trafficked area. So as we can see, the teal, the 2021, it's far above 2020 numbers, but then just not quite where 2019 was. And we're using 2019 at this point as our benchmark of trying to kind of return to full vibrancy or full activity. And this is from our CCD counters using SpringBoard. And then we can go into Placer and take the same kind of area, though they're not exactly the same. Our pedestrian counts are counting from one end of the street to the other. There's 2 cameras on each location, and the Placer boundary is literally encompassing the whole street. We kind of have a boundary that are definitely trying to incorporate those stores and other businesses on that street. So we have here our daily visits. This is information that shows us that Saturday is the most popular day of the week that people are going to the Walnut Street corridor. And then we also can see that people are staying about 150 minutes. And that's really showing that like people aren't just walking through as some might assume, because we have something like Rittenhouse Square is right at the end of Walnut, or the end of this kind of boundary. And there's also on the other side, just going straight to Broad. So we want to show, we're showing that people are actually staying in this kind of area and shopping and eating as well. And we can also get information on the trade area based on, again, where people, really where the phone is home. And it's all, like I said, very anonymous, and that's why JD is also here to answer any questions that you might have about that. But their algorithm works really well to give us accurate data that we definitely rely on. So I love looking at this map because it shows that our trade area encompasses much of Philadelphia, which would make sense, but we have a few visitors from New York and DC and Atlantic City as well. And we also use our pedestrian counts for our Dilworth Park. Like I mentioned earlier, we really do a lot of different programming there. And this is just really what the trend line looked like for 2019. It's, again, pretty seasonal in some ways, and we have a lot of activities. There's only a few months where there's not something at Dillworth, and I think we're gearing up for our fall programming now, and even staff is starting to really put their feet out for the winter, because that's a heavy lift. But the next one is what it really looked like for 2020. And what was cool about it was we did open our ice skating rink in November and really saw immediate traffic that was driven by the ice skating rink. And it was a great place for family and friends to gather, but also really be outside and have food and drink. So we really take these measures to look at how the different seasons or months are really doing in comparison with what's actually happening at the park. And as we can see in 2021, our numbers for Dillworth Park are increasing and are doing a lot, almost double the amount of people who were there in the summer the year before. And these are a little different because we do have security cameras at Dilworth. We're able to place them in a variety of different, or see a variety of different things. We have this kind of overview of where people are coming in the flow of traffic in some ways. It's cool because this is showing, you know, we kind of have an equal amount of people exiting the subway. We have people coming in through City Hall. And again, we've kind of seen that increase because City Hall doors were closed for a while as well. But our kind of most active intersection is right here on the western corner, which is adjacent to Love Park. And it's interesting because we can see that that's driving some traffic. And I think that this really helps understand programming, but also we do a lot of marketplaces at Dilworth as well. I know there will be a fall one, and they often want to know whether it be for sponsorships or for just general, like, where are people going and where are they staying, and that's how we use our counters as SpringBoard to do that. But then we can also go into Placer and see, well, people are coming from different zip codes, and it's fascinating information and information that we want to continue building on. And it's something that we're looking more into now, trying to use Placer for Dillworth Park. We've really looked at it from just our on-street vibrancy measures, but now we're really trying to dig into what does Placer tell us for Dillworth Park specifically. And I think having that home location is really important, because we can say, you know, a lot of people are coming from University City, that 91904 zip code, and Southwest Philly, and it's helpful to see where the audience is coming from. And so we really gain a lot of information from pedestrian counts, and from just Placer and SpringBoard, and we can understand the number of visitors by hour, frequency of visits, duration of visits. We can even go down to how often do people come, and where people are traveling from. And I think that this information has really informed our reporting as a whole, but also has helped us internally have some decision-making action items, but also just, we also like to sometimes share this information with brokers who are even trying to advertise on the retail spaces. And it's just really good information to have to share just what is actually happening on the streets. That's always our question, is like, what's actually happening? And we can kind of get that information from our pedestrian counts. So with that, that's the pretty much end of my presentation. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have, but here's also my contact information if you have any questions outside of this. But I just wanted to share what we do here at CCD.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I mean, it's fascinating to see that you guys are on a similar path to recovery that we're experiencing in Lincoln Square. So it's always great to see those numbers trend up closer to 2019.
Yeah.
So if anyone has a question, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, you know, I can key one up for you. I'd be fascinated to hear more about how the trade area data has affected any of your marketing or outreach, and also how that pairs with those different population segments, and whether or not you've sort of, I know you mentioned you are focusing more on bringing employees back lately, but has that data insight sort of shaped your outreach in the last year and a half?
Yeah, it hasn't necessarily shaped direct outreach, but it has given us a little bit more information that we can now work with. We just actually added Placer this year. It hasn't even been a year in this. Mm-hmm. And so we're really trying to get down to what we can know. We're still learning day to day, because there's just so much information, and I didn't even share all of it, honestly. I shared really how we use it, but there's even more than what I shared. And I know that there are some cases where we just did a vaccine parade over the weekend. And I know a question is, can you tell us the people, like the areas of zip codes that were in Dillworth Park at this point in time during the vaccine parade? And I think that would give us a little bit of information of the people who actually went out, but also how we can better reach them going in the future.
That's great.
I see Kelly. I should probably, explain. We did the city of Philadelphia, in partnership with a lot of different organizations, did a vaccine parade throughout Philadelphia. So they started, I think, in West Philly, and then made their way to North Philly, where they would stop at different locations, set up a quick vaccination camp. And if you wanted to go in and get vaccinated, you could. So it was really trying to bring the vaccines to people in their neighborhoods.
Great.
I am really curious about the non-resident pedestrian data that you showed. Like it shows, so like, I mean, in my mind, that translates to the commuters who work in the area. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts, or if you've seen in any of your other data that maybe you weren't able to show, if any of those non-resident pedestrians are on other modes of transportation. So maybe they're not getting counted as pedestrians anymore.
Yeah, I think that this is a question that we've also kind of asked of what constitutes that worker, especially with the pandemic. It's like, you're working at home, so are you actually in the office? And I think that JD was really good at explaining it for us of the timeline of what constitutes as who's in the worker pool. But I do think that the way that we kind of understand it, and again, JD, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that we understand it, it's really where the cell phone is, and it's not they are able to show kind of the routes of transportation. I have a map that shows like the Broad Street line, which is our main kind of subway line, and the Market Frankfurt line as really main points of how people get places. But I think we're really looking at it as like, this is where the cell phone is in this time period for this amount, like this duration, whether that be for 4 months, this person comes here every day, or this phone really comes here every day.
This may be a question for JD, but I'd be fascinated to hear how the last sort of year and a half of remote work has maybe blurred the lines of how you differentiate between, you know, a non-resident worker or you know, a resident. Because I know for me personally, I'm now working on a flex schedule where I'm going in to the office 2 days a week. So has that represented a challenge in sort of dividing people into those buckets?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a question we get a lot about how we mark somebody as a worker or not. So I work from home, as everybody does at Placer, and we all don't have a work location in Placer. If we're a panelist and we're contributing our movements all the time with our phones, we just have a home location. We don't have a work location. If for some reason I decided to go start working out of a co-working spot here, I would, if I started working there at least once a week for 4 hours, even if it was that small amount of time, if I started doing that on a repeated basis every week for a couple of months, we would start to mark that as a work location. So it does take a little while if you've used to go to an office, but you've stopped because of the pandemic and now you're going back to an office again. It does take us a little while to sort of reestablish that work visit pattern. And we're always looking for the best work location. So if you, visit one place, you have a couple of part-time jobs, let's say, and you visit one place, 2 or 3 times a week for over 4 hours, and then you visit a different place, just once a week for 4 hours, we're gonna pick the place that is the place that you visit the most often to be your work location, but we only pick one work location per panelist. So it does, I got asked our question the other day. So, what happens to somebody who just goes to the gym all the time? Is that gonna get marked as their work location if they're just like a workout rat? And I said, well, if they don't go anywhere else, then yeah, we might count that as their work location if they spend more than 4 hours at the gym. I don't know very many people that do that, but maybe that could be an edge case that comes up from time to time.
That's really helped us as well, because we actually made the calculation of ourselves by taking the overlap in the resident and the worker groups, because there are, Philadelphia is a livable downtown, so there are a lot of people who are living and working there. So we wanted to capture those who are truly kind of commuting out and moving in, or not moving, working in, commuting in. I also have a question from Mike, who asked me directly, have businesses showed interest in using this data directly for their marketing or operations. And yes, businesses have, I think specifically brokers, a lot of the commercial real estate brokers have, we have a really good working relationship with most of them. And they've asked, you know, could you tell us kind of the highest point of the day for this area? I'd like to share this with the person who's interested in a space. And I think that's where we've seen the most interest in the kind of selling a space. But I think also we do provide this information for our sponsors who do events in Dillworth Park. And I think that also is very much a part of marketing, of giving them that, like, this is how many people went past your billboard or went past your sign. And that has helped a lot as well, to also show sponsors and really businesses and brokers that we have the reliable data, and we're really willing to share as well.
Have there been any instances where, you know, say a public policy has been instituted that really sort of helped jumpstart foot traffic?
Yeah, well, I mean, the streeteries have definitely impacted foot traffic, and you can clearly see the start of outdoor dining. And when those restrictions were changed a little bit in October, that's when it peaked for pedestrian counts in 2020. So I think that's a clear direct correlation. It's also data that we want to keep track of as well, because we also have been trying to help streeteries and restaurants with that. So that's a direct correlation of people wanted to eat, so we saw them out and eating. It's really interesting because we also kind of count the seats as well. So it's cool to have some overlap of data of saying there's a restaurant with 150 seats, and we can see that this area, like 13th and Sandston, as I mentioned, is one of the most popular locations on the weekend. So that is how we've really kind of seen that direct correlation, at least in 2020 for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I can imagine this data would be super useful in that public policy realm. And even if it's just sort of feedback on policies like streeteries or outdoor dining that have been implemented, you know, I think that's highly valuable. More of a comment than a question.
Thanks. Yes, and I think even like this weekend, Made in America is going to be happening in Philly, and I'm sure we'll see like a peak of really pedestrians just because of the festival that's down the street from us. So it'll be interesting.
All right, we got some hands raised. Let's shoot it to Sid. I didn't see who raised a hand first, but.
I think it was Olivia who did, but I was just curious how resiliency, such as I'm sure there was a lot of flooding in Center City, Philadelphia today. How does that impact your work?
Yeah, so I think it's Philadelphia, or at least Center City, is definitely surrounded by two rivers. So it's something that we definitely want to keep in mind. Fortunately, there wasn't a lot of damage or anything really in the downtown core. There's really some sort of buffer. I'm not exactly sure of the landscape, like the direct landscape kind of terms, but there is some sort of like buffer that Center City is able to have in that way. But I think that we all are very engaged in helping clean up. I know in times like our street cleaners have helped when there is that need. So it's really also kind of being that like team player and stepping in when there's a need. And I think Olivia, you had a question as well.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for your talk, Lauren. This has been really great. And I have sort of a two-part question, so forgive me in advance. The first part is I was just sort of curious how you used to collect this data before the implementation of these urban tech sort of sensor-based tools.
So before we had SpringBoard and even access to Placer way like even in the 90s when the organization was founded. The street cleaners or the CSRs, the customer service representatives, were out actually physically counting people. And I know that was something that in Dilworth they did a lot of, and I've seen the actual like logs of their historical data of just kind of standing at a corner and counting how many people walk by. But we haven't really, now that we have the software to digitize it, that kind of isn't something that we've looked at in a while, but I think it would be really interesting to see kind of how that trends from just their people counting, literally just counting people.
Okay, cool. And then I guess this is a question or maybe a statement, but I'm wondering about the demographic information that can be gleaned from the home location of your visitors. So for example, it seemed like you had folks visiting from like the University City area. And I imagine, you know, perhaps the demographics in that area would trend younger, or, you know, like the family size might be smaller. And then I was wondering if you would basically take what you know from those locations and then essentially like tailor programming around those visitor groups. And if that's something that would be interesting, or if there would be more of an interest in attracting people from other parts of the city that are not necessarily your visitors currently. So I'm sort of wondering about like how this tech is being used to sort of like, I don't know, like envision or strategize for future programming, like maybe even like 5 years out.
Yeah, and that's definitely a great question. And Placer does have the ability to give kind of a general demographic based on home location using ACS. And that's a kind of already built in their platform. I know for us, we also collect that data separately. So we kind of have a general idea of the like average demographics of the zip codes. But I think that it is kind of an average just based on the ACS. So I think that what we have done is we know that, for example, the roller rink was really popular amongst college-aged residents. And that's something that, well, we eventually learned kind of after the fact of putting it out there, but now moving in the future, it's a good way of saying, okay, this is something that we have so many universities in Philadelphia, or really large ones too, so this is something that is attractive to them. So how can we either bridge the gap in having it more family friendly, or really play into that market? So those are some of the ways that we've used just demographics in general, but I do think that moving forward, we really want it. I think that this is more really in the parks, in the programming in the parks, to be very accessible, and knowing who's coming is really going to help add that accessibility layer of reaching out to people who might not know what's there, because I know that we really focus on the center city residents in some way, because that's they're there. That's definitely people that we want to engage, but also, especially with Dillworth Park, have expanded that to really serving all of Philadelphia.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Nur, you have your...
Hi, just curious to hear from you if the data you're collecting is being used for longer term development vision, just understanding that, potentially you could make the case that as residential development grows in CCD, it's contributed to, much higher foot traffic levels for businesses downtown, or with the pandemic and hybrid workforce in play, that maybe certain sections of CCD have now seen a drop in foot traffic, and rethinking the reuse or redevelopment of some of those properties for other uses. I'm just wondering if that's the plan, or if you know of any other districts that are using that data for longer term visioning.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that we have definitely thought about it on a short-term kind of scale. We have done different programming, especially for retail, of like Shop Center City Saturday, and that's a point where we'll say this event drew like X amount more of pedestrians than it would in a regular weekend, or than a regular weekend without it. And I know that that's coming up soon, and that's something now that we have Placer, we're going to look at. But I think on a longer term, we are definitely thinking about how to use the information, especially, like I said, we're really like targeted on the 1100 or 1700 block of Walnut, just because it's such a high retail space. And that's something that when we have those kind of friendly relationships with folks there. So I think that that's something that we always talk about, is kind of how to make this a more vibrant area, and how can our data support that that mission, or also support kind of the goals that they have. But I think looking at a kind of larger 10 or 15-year plan, we haven't quite gotten that far in digging our data to affect those decisions, but we have really looked at it from a year to year and month to month time period. I see Lorraine.
Yeah, thanks so much for your talk, Lauren. I was wondering if you've compared the pedestrian counts data against other transportation data, and like also kind of how do you go about invalidating some of that data that you're seeing in trends?
Yeah, I think that we do a lot of validating, especially between our like pedestrian counts in place, or we just want to make sure that it's really telling the same story, because if one's off, then that means either camera's down, or we're not capturing the right thing in place there. So that we definitely look at that really weekly almost. But I think we also build on the transportation data in our monthly report. We really put it side by side in a sense of, this is the trend that SEPTA is having. And you can see that a couple months SEPTA did not have a great month, but it did a little better earlier in the summer. So it's kind of making sure that we're providing all of that data. We're not necessarily drawing those direct correlations between the two, unless we really actually know what's happening. Like, for example, return of school, we'll definitely be able to say that, you know, there are a lot more people on the train, there are a lot more people on the streets, and the school year just started. So that's a direct correlation. But I think there's not as much correlations that we've been able to directly draw like that, that's so obvious, but we're definitely looking at them together. And even, like I said, in our monthly report, it's transportation, and then you have right under that the pedestrian count data.
That's really cool. Thank you. I know it's this is kind of a little plug, but I don't know if you're familiar with South Street Head House. There was a ongoing like Knight Foundation project there called Edit the City. And I had a small part in getting to sit in. I'm no longer working on that project, but I think it's still ongoing. And it was like kind of centered around this idea of open data engagement, and pedestrian counts. I know it's very difficult to collect. So I think it's really cool that you guys are looking at this kind of data.
Oh, thanks. It sounds, what you just described also sounds equally as cool.
Yeah, it's with the South Street Head House bid district. Like, I think it's neighboring to you guys.
Yeah.
I'm not very familiar with Philly, like the area, but
it is neighboring. Yeah, we're aligned.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Olivia, you have another question?
Yeah, that was just, well, what Lorraine just mentioned sort of made me think, do you guys ever like package the pedestrian data and share it back to the pedestrians? I mean, obviously your reports are publicly accessible, but I wonder if can you like publicly engage pedestrians while like with pedestrian count data and make it you know, informative, or like, I don't know, put decals on the intersection that say like, this is the most used intersection? Like, are there fun ways to engage the public? And is there any interest around that? Is it just for nerdy people like us who would think that was cool? Like, I don't know, like turning it around and handing it back to the people who are generating the data.
Yeah, we haven't necessarily engaged in the way of like, this is the most used area, but we do tweet out the data and try to engage on a social media space outside of just our reports, like mentioning that they are public, but we do want people to see it outside of just like the business community that is going straight to the website. So we have been really trying to think of creative ways of sharing that data. We just recently did like a little GIF for like people increasing, like, so we're trying to make the data cool. We want more people to find data cool. But we haven't necessarily done that on a street to street level, though we have engaged people just throughout surveying with the annual survey that we used to do, or did really before the pandemic, of talking to people face to face of like, what are the things that you see in Center City?
And I imagine you deploy your community representatives to the busiest areas.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And that's a good point. We have done a little bit of overlap with that as well. I know earlier in the year, as we're expecting more office workers to come back, I know that the person who kind of deploys this CSRs are asked, you know, what camera do you see as been increasing in the last couple of months? So what block should we put them? And I think that those are conversations that we're having internally.
Kelly?
All right, I know we're coming up on time here, but just like that, Olivia's question kind of made me wonder. You said that you have provided the data to like the real estate industry kind of when they're looking to rent out spaces or sell spaces. Have you had elected officials specifically ask for it?
We have not.
They show interest?
Yeah, no, we have not had elected officials ask for it. That would be great. But we do, a lot of our research is directed to like public officials. But we have not had them ask specifically for any, but we have had people who like are looking to write an article or are looking to kind of like explore the data a little bit more. I know there's been a Temple professor that kind of asked for this data because they know we have it.
All right, I might try and sneak one last question in there if we have time, but you know, maybe it's because of the storm last night, but you know, I think that as planners, a lot of us are kind of sick of hearing that, you know, we can't really afford to invest in infrastructure to address climate change. So I'm wondering if there's been, I mean, and this might sort of be out of the scope of just Center City District, but with this sort of data, we have the possibility of sort of correlating extreme weather events and foot traffic, which can sort of be a proxy for, you know, opportunities for retail and other businesses to attract customers. And I'm just wondering, you know, have you thought about this as another vector to sort of address the economic impact of any of those things? Or maybe, JD, if you all at Placer have, maybe you maybe could sort of address this on a larger scale.
Well, I'll first take a stab at the question on the CCD side. I think that we are definitely looking at the economic impact of people being in the Center City area. And I think we're really, you know, trying to think about that on the terms of sustainability and resiliency as well. But I know that we've really focused on kind of driving that vibrancy and creating that strong business community. That's really our focus, and kind of working either with sustainability in the city on that kind of other element of your question. But we definitely look at the economic impact of either whether it be like Restaurant Week or, like I said, Shop Center City, which has direct impact to the businesses that we're definitely trying to help.
I apologize for the noise in the background, but there are a couple of ways that we do that. One is through we have a public tool that I'll just share my screen and show really quickly. If you go to Placer AI and then you go to this section called the Square, it's called our recovery dashboard, and it's about COVID and COVID recovery. But basically, what we're looking at is for any zip code, city, state, county, and then some, not all, but some bids. Bid polygons are quite hard to get a hold of in bulk, but in any event, we're attempting to show sort of like what the recovery looks like from COVID, right? So you can think about this in terms of any sort of event analysis. You can go into Placer and look at a particular, see if there's particular impact from an event. So one thing that I see a lot, I'm in Houston, Texas. So this is just to give you a quick look here. This is the shopping center that's nearest to my house. And if I go ahead and take a look at one of their reports and then look, we're looking at the last 12 months. If I come in and take a look at the visit trend data, I'll see, and I know I'm going to see it because I've seen it a million times, is one sec while it loads, one second. Okay. Right here, this period was the period when we had the freeze in Texas, where everything was sort of, people weren't going anywhere, and there's definitely, you can tell there's a normal variation of visits, 15,000 or so visits to the shopping center on a weekday, and during the weekdays during the freeze, there was, was much lower. So you could, of course, assess the economic impact via a particular location, or use something like, and again, this is about COVID recovery, but there are ways to go about this. So yeah, I mean, that's a question we get asked often by a lot of our customers about, what happened, some event happened at our, at this location. Can you tell us what the impact was in terms of foot traffic?
I'm just going to jump in. Could you, if there was a mass migration event, say a serious hurricane is coming, would you be able to see where the phones are now sleeping at a different location and they've migrated out of the area?
Yeah, we do actually have a migration trends. It's a product, but we have a sort of a preview of it here also on the website, where we can tell you at the state level where people moved to or moved from, and we're just telling you here people that move, how many people move from or to a specific place, but we take it in the product that we sell, it's down to the zip code level, so we can tell you what zip code people move to or from. And it takes us about 3 weeks to figure out whether somebody moved physically from one place to another and where that's a permanent move or not, right? Because if we're not tracking it, we're tracking people's movements if we're not assigning a new home location until about 3 weeks have gone past. We think 2 weeks is a long vacation, and 3 weeks you've actually decided to move to a new spot. So that is something that we can do, and gosh, I think that we've been doing this for maybe 3 or 4 months. So it's a pretty new thing for us to do, is to be able to take our data and use it for migration.
All right, well, we're running up on time. So before everyone starts to jump off, I want to thank Lauren and JD for joining us. I know that I am very excited to visit Center City sometime soon. So thanks again for coming out. I'm glad to see everyone has weathered the storm and is able to join us. So
thank you all for having me and giving me the opportunity to share a little bit of Center City District and how we use our data.